Isaac! You were drifting away for a moment there, Mr. Clark. I believe you were telling me about your nightmares that you've been having.
Earlier this year, I finally played the original Dead Space for the very first time in preparation for the remake. I ended up really enjoying both versions of the game, and it led to me wondering what the Dead Space sequels were like, since the series has quickly piqued my interest thanks to how good the gameplay has aged and the interesting story to complement it. So needless to say, I was beyond excited to jump into the second one, definitely with how many people kept telling me it's better than the first one in almost every way. Well, after beating it and really thinking about how I feel about it, Dead Space 2 is an amazing sequel that has multiple high points that beat any one point in the original Dead Space for me. But in terms of overall gameplay experience, when you factor in everything, Dead Space does a better job than the sequel for me. But I suppose I should probably explain why I feel this way through going over what I liked and disliked about Dead Space 2. Starting with the opening, waking up in this medical facility in a straitjacket wondering what the hell is even going on as the person in front of you gets impaled by a necromorph is so sick in the best kind of way. Then as the necromorphs start slaughtering everyone around you as you start running for your life has to be one of the best experiences, and to me, the highest point of the horror aspect of Dead Space 2. No other point in the game captures this pure terror of the actual situation you're in than this opening sequence. Now, the next high point for me was this crazy high-speed train sequence where you're fighting necromorphs in such a good atmosphere with this lighting that just brings the scene together. That ends with Isaac hanging upside down doing his best to survive. Then you have the sequence like when the giant necromorph is flailing you around and you barely escape by shooting the floating explosives in space, and as you can see, there is a common theme going on here. These high points are so damn good and fun, but the in-between moments can be very boring at times in comparison, and I think the new enemy types are one of the biggest issues and why I feel that way. Creating new enemy types for a game like Dead Space 2 I would have to imagine can be pretty challenging since balancing could be hard to nail. That's why I love boss fights so much in games. It allows a dev team to create an experience without the confines of trying to account for everything else that may interact with it. So starting with the new children enemies, I really dislike these. From a gameplay perspective, they are beyond boring to fight, and just feel like they are there to be an ammo check to make sure you don't have too much of that. And they even fail at that. Not to mention from a design standpoint, they don't even fit the game to me. They look like little gray aliens to me, not necromorphs. Next we have the explosive babies. Now I will say the children's section you played through was very well designed. It did have a certain creepiness to it. Unfortunately, as cool as the environment was, the babies also suck to fight. They have no real interesting mechanics, they just kind of crawl around and whine. If they could have just had some kind of other mechanic, like attaching to a normal necromorph to make them an exploding bomb, or maybe if they had a scream that would freeze Isaac in place, that would have been a lot more engaging to fight. But they just fall flat in all aspects, and don't even get me started with the stalkers. I mean, design-wise, I think these are really cool. The way they peek their heads is kind of adorable in a morbid way. But once you face them once, they become very boring to fight. And the main reason for that is the areas you generally fight them in is beyond predictable. They're almost always in the spots with these square crates everywhere. So as I was playing, I was like, yep, another room full of stalkers. If they had them in more areas outside of these in smaller groups, I generally think they could have been one of the coolest additions to the game, but I hope all of you can understand where I'm coming from with these enemies in the in-between areas of these super awesome moments. When you have these high points that are this damn good, it's hard to make the experience between them feel fulfilling for the player, and I'm not saying everything between these moments are bad. The cold storage area below the church and even the church itself was one of my favorite parts of the game. The artistry in those areas are incredible, and just in general, the overall art direction and environments are way more interesting compared to the first Dead Space. But it never comes off as cohesive, and I think some of that has to do with the lack of connectivity of the world you're in and how the story pushes you forward as a player. This concept of Isaac going insane because of the marker is brilliant, and a lot of the moments are so impactful as Isaac fights the urges brought on because of it. but how the story starts and how it ends is really a bummer for me. You have great side characters like Ellie and Strauss who help Isaac out that add to the impact of the story, but then you have people like Dana, who's just a very poor replacement for Kendra. Then you have Hans, who is like an angry old man telling you to stop jaywalking, but you keep doing it because he poses no real threat, and once you finally meet him, it's beyond anticlimactic. You wonder why he is even there to begin with. At least let the man transform into an unstoppable necromorph to make things interesting. I will say though, it was cool returning to the Ishimura, even if it felt a little forced in Dead Space 2. I feel like returning to it in the third Dead Space, even though I haven't played it, would have been more impactful. Felt too much like a fan service having it in the second game, even though I did enjoy my time there. And this all leads to what was probably one of the coolest yet disappointing moments for me when it comes to Dead Space 2. From chapter 1 to 13, even with the complaints I have with the game, it's still an unbelievable experience I think anyone should 100% try if they got the time. Just from a gameplay perspective, it's still one of the best mechanically sound games I've ever played in my entire life. Not to mention the javelin gun quickly became my favorite weapon to use. It's so much fun sticking enemies to walls and then shocking everything around them just to have it end with a beautiful explosion. Super satisfying. Also loved the variety of suits found throughout the game. It felt like from a story perspective, it made sense to constantly be finding these different ones. But the sequence of events to end chapter 14 are just all over the place. Going from this incredible moment of Isaac stabbing himself in the eye, which was so cool to me so he could be free from the influence of the marker, to having this invincible necromorph chasing you with enemies everywhere in these tight areas just seemed so needless. Why did he even need to be in this part of the game? If you had him back in the church area chasing you around, now that would have been more interesting, and you could have had that end with freezing him down below, but instead he just chases you then conveniently disappears when you finally reach the marker. I really thought for sure he was going to mutate and become the final boss, since that would have made total sense. Since him chasing you would have been a build up to this final battle. Instead, you jump into your own mind and fight Nicole while these damn stupid children necromorphs run at you. This was very disappointing for me because visually, this is one of the coolest things I've seen in a video game, but from a gameplay perspective to end the game after so many insane moments before this, I was very sad. But I did think the ending was a funny nod to the first game with Isaac, just staring at Ellie waiting for her to maul his face off, even if it was a little bit cheesy. Overall though, Dead Space 2 was a blast to play through, and even though there are multiple moments I believe are better than anything from the first game, obviously excluding the remake of the first game since I think comparing Dead Space 2 to that is completely unfair, I still believe the first Dead Space is a better overall experience when you factor in everything. But I do really hope they end up remaking Dead Space 2. Some of those moments would be insane if updated to today's visual standards, not to mention with a little reworking to some sections, I believe a Dead Space 2 remake could be one of the greatest games ever made, at least when it comes to horror action. Also, let me know if you have played the Dead Space 2 multiplayer. I unfortunately couldn't find any matches to try it out, and I'm curious to know how it was. Either way though, thanks for watching everyone. I look forward to eventually checking out the third Dead Space to see how it stacks up to the first two. Till next time.